Everyone is really happy to see the return of the Genta Design Ingenieur, but if there's one thing that's consistent about people's feedback of it, regardless of how much they like it, it's the price. Luckily though, IWC can help out with that. Hi everyone and welcome to Shah, Lusso, and yes, today we are talking about the IWC Ingenieur. The Ingenieur in the modern era especially has had a little bit of its ups and downs. I made a separate video talking about how I think IWC made a mistake to kill off the Genta Design Ingenieur and go back to the 1950s one. But then last year they came back with the Genta Ingenieur and it was exactly what everyone wanted. The only issue is that for most people, they thought that the price was too much. Now, I haven't had the new one in hand to judge whether I think it's too expensive or not, but what I do know is that IWC did make a modern Ingenieur that was actually quite true to the original and that you can get for much less than a new one. And that is, of course, the IW3227 and 3228 of the early 2000s. Now, this was the first major overhaul of the Ingenieur line, and it really brought everything into the modern era. Before then, they had really been going smaller, going quartz. This really brought things back into the modern era. It brought things into what the watch world was at the time, and also really made a statement because it featured IWC's in-house movement, the 80110, or in the case of today's IW3228, which is the 40mm version, it actually featured the 80111 visible through a see-through caseback. The one we're featuring today is actually a 40mm, so in terms of diameter, it's the same size as the current generation Ingenieur, and also it's closer at least to the 1970s counterpart, which was around 38mm. Where this does differ from that, as well as the current one, is in the thickness. This watch is around 13.5mm thick, so despite having a slightly thinner movement than its 42mm variant, which was 14.5mm thick, it is still a relatively chunky watch, and that is probably the main criticism we need to get out of the way. This is not a thin watch or a slim watch, but when you consider this is also a watch with 120 meters of water resistance, as well as anti-magnetic properties, and a see-through caseback, which the current one doesn't have, suddenly it starts to make a bit more sense. Starting from the back, that movement is actually a really nice touch because not only is it an in-house movement with IWC's Peloton winding system, it's really nicely decorated and it really does fill the whole caseback, which is something that a lot of watches, especially at the time this was released, weren't really doing because a lot of them were based around ETA 2892s, which are a relatively small movement for a watch that can be more than 40mm. Following through along the caseback, you also have IWC's insanely over-engineered bracelet. You can see the dimples for removing the bracelet and removing the links. And while yes, you need to make sure you use something like a toothpick or you sellotape up your tools so that you don't scratch it, when you get used to it, it actually makes it really easy to resize them. I get these watches landed to me by CHRONEXT most of the time, and I generally avoid resizing them myself because I don't want to scratch them. However, with this, I did have the confidence to do it, because with a toothpick, I could just remove the links without any real fear of damaging it. Same thing with taking off the bracelets to get some of these shots. And this was something that IWC was pioneering in the early 2000s, these insanely over-engineered watches. This watch was released in 2007, however, the original of this generation was released in 2005, and it already had this crazy system, which we're marveling on things like the Cartier Santos these days for having it, but that was just a couple of years ago they released that. IWC was committed to pouring value into this watch, which is something IWC had already been doing for years. Look at that titanium aqua timer that I reviewed a few weeks ago if you need more proof of that. Turning it around and the attention to detail is no less. You have this crazy texture on the dial which really creates a dynamic element to it, and the rose gold indices add a little bit more of that luxury feel to a watch that is otherwise very utilitarian. Of course though, this watch does have its downsides, and mainly they are to do with that thickness. But this was something that IWC rectified in 2013 when they replaced this. When they introduced the next generation, it was slimmer, but then they ditched the in-house movement to achieve that. They also introduced the crown guards, which carried on to the 2023 version. So this, in many ways, this IW3228 was the truest modern reimagination of the Genta original. While proportionately it was bigger, it carried a lot more of the design cues while still introducing modern elements such as the in-house movement, such as the over-engineered bracelet, and really focused on that marriage of luxury and practicality. The new one perhaps is much more leaning into the luxury side instead of necessarily remembering its utilitarian roots. But it is also a different philosophy, and at the end of the day, IWC did put a lot of work into the new one, and I'm glad that they introduced it. But when we're talking about prices, well, the new one sells for over 12,000 euros. These ones range really depending on which variation you get. The titanium AMG ones can be had for around 4,500 euros. This one, however, tends to be a little bit more expensive because of the fact that it has that more wrist-friendly 40mm size, and it also has the visible movement on the back. In my opinion, this is the best of the bunch, and if you're looking to get an Ingenieur, I would definitely say try one of these out before you consider going for the more expensive new one, because you may be surprised at how good it is. And a big thanks, of course, to today's sponsor CHRONEXT for giving me the opportunity to try one of these out and see how it really was on the wrist, because in pictures is one thing, but when you have a watch in hand, it makes a huge difference. So make sure you check out the links in the description below to see if there's a watch you might want to have on your wrist. But let me know in the comments below, what do you think of the IWC Ingenieur? Of all the different generations that have come and gone over the last few years, which is your favorite and why? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Of course, if you like this video, then make sure you like it and share it. If you want to see more pictures and infographics of watches as seen throughout this and all my other videos, then make sure you follow me on Instagram at Lusso. If you want to see more videos about watches, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you know when the next video comes out. And if you want to see more IWC content, then check out my playlist for that, including my other videos about the Ingenieur. But thanks for joining me on this quick exploration of one of the most underrated IWCs and one of the most underrated Genta designs in general. And we'll catch you on the next video.